Thank you, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video. Hello, and welcome to Chill Sketchbook Session number 2. I hope you guys like these sketchbook pages because I am definitely making this a video series, so I have recently decided. In this video, I'll take you through the process of filling up the right-hand side of this first double-page spread in my new sketchbook. So my partner recently got this Vietnamese coffee set and it's super nice. I figured I'd set the mood with some warm beverage making footage before I get to the sketchbook. So yeah, make yourself some coffee or tea, get cozy, and let's draw it together. So far, it has been a very cathartic experience for me to get back to mindlessly filling a page with something spontaneous. It has been especially fun to capture the sketching process because it's something that I seldom do in my regular videos, and to be honest, it has been really refreshing to just sketch like this once again. I feel like I haven't done that in so long, and as you can see, I do change a ton of things while sketching spontaneously like this, especially things like posing and limb placement. Goes through a ton of changes, and it's really fun. It's kind of like staging a photo in a way. Yeah, so I started the sketch with a vague idea of wanting to draw my character Heijin and maybe another character with her just laying around on a grassy hill enjoying the warmth of a late summer afternoon after classes or something like that. And as you've probably noticed, I'm really into the school life subject matter or genre or whatever you might want to call it. Probably because when I was in high school, instead of going to class a lot of the time, I'd frequently just stay home in bed all day and read school life manga, which helped me escape into some sort of vicarious remote existence, which was very pleasant. So I have this weird removed nostalgia for these things, and I do enjoy drawing them quite a lot. So anyway, I started out with some approximate placement of Heijin and maybe Noelle, I figured, resting her head. But I decided to just figure out Heijin's pose exactly first before adding anybody else into the mix. But as you can see, I kind of kept going back, adding a person, removing them, changing her legs, adding, redrawing a person without even, really deciding who it was going to be, and then erasing them again. But yeah, so subsequently I ended up changing things back and forth many times before finally settling on an adequate undersketch. As you can see, when I draw characters, I pretty much ignore their clothing to a large degree until I reach a point where figuring out the clothes is the next step, and I don't really change the placement and positioning of the body or body parts at that point. I find drawing the clothes on top of a body outline much easier than going straight in with the clothing right off the bat. I don't know if people even do this. I think some people do sometimes, but yeah, my personal preference is to always just draw the naked body first and then figure out the clothes afterwards. So yeah, the sketch ended up getting a lot messier than typical for me, but I did manage to decipher it while inking later on. Can't say that it would have been the same situation if I left the sketch sitting around for a day or two though, because honestly, the messiness kind of ended up a little bit out of control by the end of the sketch, but I digress. Yeah, I was very loose with this one, and I think it's because it was a lot of fun and I haven't really done anything like this in a while, and I was kind of figuring everything out spontaneously on the spot that it ended up being way messier than usual for me. It's so funny for me to see actually how chaotic the sketching can get if I do it on paper, because I have really forgotten what that was like, especially since I spent years only sketching with a pen and mostly doing super quick non-committal study type of drawings in my older sketchbooks. I just realized that it's been forever since I've actually sat down to sketch with a pencil with the intention of making some sort of nice drawing to fill a page with, but not for any particular predetermined reason. So yeah, very much enjoying that. And in my last video, I mentioned that I didn't really like inking with the Twispy fountain pen, even though it's so pretty. But for this one, I decided to stay within the color scheme, like I mentioned, because of my, profound need for the aesthetic matching of the two pages. But yeah, so in order to make the double page spread match, I decided to just switch things around a little bit as far as tools and inks go, but go for the same color scheme. And so, firstly, I definitely wasn't gonna use the Twisby pen again, like I mentioned, because it was skipping. So it was between going out to buy some new fine liners or to just use my good old go-to, which is a dip pen with the trusty G nib that I mentioned in like pretty much every single one of my videos, because it's the only nib I use. And since the ink I used on the left hand page was not permanent when dry, meaning that it lifts and bleeds with water, I decided to use this PH Dr. Martens Van Dyke brown ink instead. I picked it because the color looked close enough to me, and I haven't used it in a really long time for whatever reason, and I actually ended up remembering exactly why I stopped using it in the first place very shortly into the process. So basically, this ink is very shiny when it's dry, and that is something I really tend to dislike. I prefer a matte finish. It just looks darker to me, and I don't like glare on artwork, so I most likely won't be using this ink much again anytime soon. I'm not really sure if it's still super shiny if it's diluted. It might be a little bit better if I just diluted with water or something, but this one I pretty much dipped like straight into the bottle, and when I was finished inking, the lines were just really shiny. And actually, speaking of shiny, one of the things that really bothers me about sketching with a pencil is that at certain angles, it's really hard to see the sketch when I turn on a lamp. And the lighting situation at my desk is not the best, so catching daylight is a little bit difficult for me, and sometimes it's so bright that I just shut the curtains. Anyways, I get kind of lazy, but I do use my lamp a lot, like my desk lamp, and so I almost always see this glare when I was drawing, and it was driving me a little bit crazy. Yeah, it's honestly just so irritating, and I have forgotten that this is exactly why a while back I started sketching with Colorays, like colored pencils, instead of these regular pencils, graphite pencils, and that was pretty much to avoid the whole shiny situation. And man, it's like this information just completely flies out of my head, and I have to rediscover these things all over again. I guess it's just what happens when I go back and forth and just change my mediums and the way that I approach things all the time without bothering to take proper notes of what worked and what didn't. And so, yeah, stumble upon a bunch of stuff that I have apparently forgotten about while I was working on this. But still, I did enjoy sketching with a pencil regardless. I guess the issue is probably just with the lighting, and maybe if I figure out a better lighting setup, the glare won't be such a big issue for me. So yeah, we'll see what I can do about that. So before I get to the next part, I'm going to tell you guys about this video's sponsor, which is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform with thousands of classes on a huge variety of artistic and creative topics that range from drawing, illustration, animation, all the way to photography, self-care, productivity, organization, and as I recently found out, gardening. It's the perfect place for curious people who love to learn new things, and there is no shortage of interesting topics to discover when you browse the platform. It's almost spring, and I'm super excited to plant some herbs and vegetables and pots on my balcony. Something always goes wrong with them when I do this, and I'm really hopeful that watching this absolutely delightful looking class on gardening, I will be able to do a better job this year, and I will keep track of it and let you guys know how it goes. So this class is called Gardening 101, a guide to growing and caring for plants by Geraldine Levin, and you can watch it for free by signing up using my link in the description below. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in my description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. I hope you guys check it out, and now back to the video. While I was inking this, I noticed that my nib was actually also skipping a bit. So when this happened last time, in my last video with the Twisby fountain pen, I blamed it on the humidity, but now I'm actually starting to think that it may be due to the extreme smoothness of the paper, which I believe someone may have mentioned in the comments. But yeah, I think that probably makes some sense since the ink has virtually nothing to grab onto when I glide the pen. And this makes me think that maybe using fine liners is probably going to be the best option for this type of paper. And I am planning a little trip to get some new art supplies soon. Excited to get some fresh microns, and maybe I'll pull out my ancient Copic markers and Prismacolors as well. As honestly, Copics and Prismacolor markers are so expensive, and back in the day I made a couple of large purchases of those, but then I didn't end up using them as much as I expected, and it seemed like kind of a bad monetary investment. But nowadays I've seen a lot of artist YouTubers make videos with like Ohuhu alcohol markers, I think they're called, and some other brands as well. So I think it might be cool for me to check out some of those. They seem to be at a better price point, and honestly looks like they get super good results with those, so I am kind of excited to look into that. So inking the sketch was pretty relaxing otherwise, and I especially get a huge kick out of details in shoes and accessories. It's funny how years go by, but these things just never change because I have always just adored drawing shoes and accessories specifically. For as long as I can remember, ever since I started drawing characters, which must have been when I was like 12 or something. And so I used to actually have a little story. I used to have a pair of shoes like the ones that Sock is wearing here, except mine were more feminine. Yeah, they had a higher heel and no front stitching details and a side zipper instead of the Chelsea boot style that I have here. But yeah, I love those studded heels so much that I just wore them into dust, and unfortunately have never been able to find anything similar since. Over the years, I've had at least like 4 other pairs of shoes that I should seriously have bought doubles of because they were not very expensive at all, like under $100 or something, but unique enough that surprisingly I have never been able to replace any of my favorite pairs, and unfortunately they just basically fell apart. But yeah, I'm generally really into observing the details of clothing when I'm out and about. I do have horrible situational and spatial awareness, but clothing detail is something that I never fail to notice, which is pretty much how I can get by without pulling up any references most of the time for drawing stuff like this. Some of this clothing I'm super familiar with, of course, because this uniform that I have drawn about 1,000,000 times since my high school years, but otherwise I do like to keep a vast visual library of random details that I pick up on when I'm out, which I keep in my head for later use when I get to drawing. I think it also helps a lot to just think at length about how things like clothing wise, accessories and whatnot function and come together. This is probably common practice for a ton of artists, but I have gotten a lot of questions and comments over the years about how my art looks so detailed, but not detailed at the same time. And I do think that the reason for this effect is that I only really draw things in a way that makes functional sense to me, and I spare the details that are unnecessary in that context. So I don't know if that properly explained things, but I definitely never add any details arbitrarily just to make things more detailed. And every single line that I choose to put down typically serves one of the following purposes. So to show one object in relation to another, like where they meet, how they meet and how they function against each other, or to show texture, or to show a surface plane change. And hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, moving on from the technicalities of my inking. Yeah, I found this perspective was a bit tricky, and I'm sure it is wonk in a lot of ways, especially like with Sock. Kind of, I don't know. It does sort of work when I look at it, but if I think about it for too long, I can see how it could have probably been done better. But I don't know, I do like to randomly throw a challenge at myself when I do things like this, and it's mostly because the pressure is low, because it's just a sketchbook page. And speaking of low pressure and throwing a challenge, I actually wanted to do something different with the hair texture. So I'm a big fan of this old English book illustrator, Arthur Rackham, and I'm especially taken with the way that he draws trees, fabric, and hair specifically. The hair that I draw, like my hair, or the hair in my drawings, is like 99% attributable to my longtime manga influence. And that's an approach that I am so used to at this point that it's almost impossible for me to shake it without trying very hard. And here it kind of occurred to me to try something slightly different with the texture. And the result is that I'm not a huge fan of how it came out. I realized that if I'm going to draw hair in an unfamiliar way, I unfortunately cannot do it on autopilot, which is how I do everything else. And it is, as it turns out, significantly more difficult for me to turn off the autopilot than I expected. So I also will definitely have to pull up some references to figure out how to achieve this really nice wispy look that I can see in Arthur Rackham's illustrations. And so yeah, the results aren't my favorite here in that aspect, but it was kind of fun to try, and I'm actually really looking forward to doing it again and actually looking at some references to achieve the effect. So yeah. So speaking of references, as I briefly mentioned, I didn't use any for this drawing nor for the one on the left hand side, and I wanted to talk a bit about why I chose to do that, as well as how to get to a point where you can get away with doing that. So yeah, the reason why I don't like looking for references before starting a drawing spontaneously, and in most cases before starting any drawing really, is just because this approach just doesn't really work for me. I think because I'm not used to it, and I don't really care for changing that particular approach. So I find that looking at pretty things on Pinterest is best for me in terms of just picking up vague ideas or building on a visual library. I don't know, picking up like little things like a setting or a certain color scheme, or just some small glimpses of potential ideas, like just crumbs in a way. I prefer to look for references only as they become necessary and unavoidable in my art when I'm already in the middle of the process. And for random sketchbook pages like this, the need just never really seems to arise, and I like the amount of freedom that I have with posing when I don't use a reference. I end up catering the pose exactly to the compositional needs of the artwork as I see fit, and I don't feel bound by the reference. In the past, when I tried to use a ref as a starting point for a drawing or for a pose, I inevitably found that I'd rather go from a slightly different angle, or then further, I'd rather change the angle of something specific, like a limb, like a hand, or the angle of the face, and eventually I would just get to a point where the references is of absolutely no use to me whatsoever, and the pose that I want is just something completely different, because so the reference just ends up being nothing more than a nuisance that just distracts me from the task. I think that's because maybe I largely do kind of cater to some sort of story element that I have in my mind when I pose my characters, and then the posing needs become super specific, and thus the pose or a pretty picture that I've chosen from Pinterest just becomes completely irrelevant to what I ended up, or to what I end up wanting to draw. And I like that I can make the decisions very quickly and change things just as quickly without being bogged down by having to stop, pause, and look for a better reference that would be more suited for whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish. And so that being said, what would be the downside of this approach? So yeah, the downside is that I am 100% reliant on just my ability to figure things out on the spot, and my current knowledge of anatomy, which is by no means super extensive. and I have to do a lot of trial and error visually, and most of the time I do settle for results that I know could have potentially been a lot better and less clunky if I just made a significant effort to look for a photo specific to my needs, or just spent more time in that state of the process. And the issue there is that I often do feel like maybe I do constantly settle for some sort of subpar result. Maybe I'm just being lazy, and when I maybe like if I just put in more work and more effort on my part, that I could produce significantly better drawings. But then I typically just have to ask myself, like, is getting quote unquote better drawings really the end goal for me? Like, do I really want to stress myself in order to just get better? Or like, what does better even mean? Like, compared to whom and why, etc. And it kind of devolves into this philosophical conundrum about what the whole point is in the first place. And there's definitely a time for studying and for focusing on improvement, for sure. But I honestly don't feel like it needs to constantly breathe down my neck personally, especially when I do really enjoy the reference-free process so much. So for me, it just seems like a pretty easy choice in general. Even though I know how serious people can get about references and the usage of references in the art community. But yeah, over the years also, my results on going blind and without any refs has actually gotten a lot better. Like, I've seen some tremendous improvement, and I think this type of approach has a ton of positive outcomes as well. One of the best things about it to me, honestly, is that it just keeps me firmly in the zone or the flow. You probably know what I'm talking about. So while using refs, it's not the worst thing, and it's still a different experience when you never have to look away from the drawing, though. It feels a bit more intimate, and to me it feels more like a stream of consciousness flowing directly out of my head. But that's very different from actively searching for things on a screen or in books as you're working on a piece. So I do prefer this intense type of focus, and I kind of like that the imperfection and spontaneity that it produces. And I do honestly even enjoy seeing some of the errors, things that I could do differently next time. And I do think that's actually one of the things that kind of helps me improve in a lot of ways. I can't say that this is a particularly fast way of improving. Like, maybe, using more references and studying more would make me improve faster, but this is fine. It's definitely something that I'm willing to settle for. And yeah, that being said, I still do, of course, use references now and then in a different context, and I think it's a perfectly good thing to do. So now I thought I'd briefly talk about how I got to the point of being able to not get away with not using references. I honestly don't think it's something I had to really work for or wait for. It's always just something I did, and with time I got better at it. The only thing I really wanted to say was that the biggest factor, I think, in this process is to just be able to thoroughly understand the very basic principles of how to place and construct simple objects in 3D space and structure a human body out of them. And other things, like whatever's part of the scene that you're trying to draw. So working your way up from simple forms and slowly adding complexity is the general gist of the process, and any object can be broken down into super simple 3-dimensional forms, shapes, and thus the ability to do that is pretty much at the base of drawing whatever you want without a reference. And it's honestly not particularly difficult if you just grasp that, and your accuracy will go up with practice and with knowledge of anatomy, plus the vastness of your own visual library. So you just need to observe a lot, pay attention to details, pay attention to how things work functionally, and from that using just the knowledge of how to construct 3D objects in 3D space is pretty much all you need. But yeah, anyways, back to the process. The ink that I decided to use for tones is the same one I used for the left hand side of the page spread as seen on my last video, and it's the Writing Desk ink by Ferris Wheel Press. I regret not diluting it a bit more for Hagen's skirt. I think it ate up the line work a little bit, but you know, what can I do? I definitely used more water for socks, pants, and Noel's skirt though, and I think it does look quite a bit nicer there. I didn't do anything crazy with the lighting here. I didn't even really think about it, to be honest, and then later I remembered that in the sketching phase I thought about doing a nice shadow over top of Hagen's face that has little dancing lights that come through the leaves of a tree, which they're presumably hanging out under. But unfortunately, I totally forgot about this when I got to the tones, and I'll just try to revisit that lighting scenario in some other drawing. I've always wanted to have a sketchbook filled with finished looking drawings like these, and after years of shitty, cheap sketchbooks being filled with ballpoint pen speed steadies, it's honestly a relief to see a page spread like this, and I'm really looking forward to another chill sketchbook session, hopefully soon. As I've mentioned before, I'm currently working on a new art book with 3D Total, and this will be a Kickstarter sometime soon, but the date is still to be determined, and by sometime soon I mean like, you know, some months away still. Yeah, last week I finally finished the cover art, and I'm really excited to reveal it to you guys eventually, but I'll probably do that sometime later. And of course I recorded the footage, so there will definitely be a process video for that. And in other news, the weather took a horrible turn lately here in Toronto, and honestly, it's so cold, and I cannot wait for spring to just arrive already, hopefully any day now. But yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed watching the video and seeing the process of how this page came together. I hope you enjoyed my little chat about it. It kind of went off topic a couple of times, but overall, I do really like how this page turned out. I really like seeing them side by side. I'm glad they match in color scheme, and I will see you guys in the next installment of this new little series that I have going. So thank you for watching my video. I hope you do leave a comment. It really helps motivate me a lot, and I hope you subscribe if you still haven't, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.